Happy Motoring comes alongside as just to head back. Down on the rail and holding third is Tijuana Taxi. Here comes Son Sam, wheeling 3 wide and going right up to join him. Son Sam on the far outside, now clears her length and is...
Hello, it's Bob Pandolfo, and it's Thursday, October 5th, 2023. Welcome to this edition of Power Brush with Pandy here. I am talking about harness racing. I'm going to talk about some great horses today. I posted this link this week on the great Facebook page, Harness Racing History, and I said, let's have a list, let's see if we can list great horses, paces, and trotters that really didn't come into their own until after their 3-year-old season, or had their best years. And we've got so many great names. Thanks for everybody for contributing. I started out with Bulldog Hanover. Now here's Bulldog Hanover's record. As you can see, he was a good 2-year-old. I mean, he won 4 out of 6 races, and then he was a good 3-year-old. He won 10 out of 15 races. Now he didn't win horse of 2-year-old of the year or 3-year-old of the year, but fortunately they didn't retire him, because as a 4-year-old, 14 wins and 16 starts, and this is of course when he really came into his own, became a world record champion horse. As you can see, he went 148 as a 3-year-old, but as a 4-year-old, he set a world record of 145 and 4, a first horse to pace in under 146. A phenomenal season, one of the best I've ever seen. I mean, that would be right up there with horses like Arts Place and Real Desire, horses that had great 4-year-old seasons. 14 wins, 16 starts. I mean, unbelievable. So people started listing all these horses, and let's just go over some of the horses. Some of you may remember Genghis Khan. Right now, here's Genghis Khan. He had his best year, I'm looking at some of my notes here, as a 6-year-old in 1982. That's when he retired. So you can see early in his career, here he is in 1979. He only had 1 win in 22 starts. Let's see, he was 6, 5, 4. Yeah, that was when he was a 3-year-old. Now, imagine if they had retired him. As we know now, nowadays, and this has been going on now for probably the last 15 years or so, more and more, and you're seeing this in harness racing and thoroughbred racing, where they just retire horses right after the 3-year-old season. If they had retired Genghis Khan, we would never have really, he would be a footnote in history. Because here, as a 4-year-old, he came into his own, and then as a 6-year-old, he won 18 races and went 151 and 4, beating Niatros's track record at the Meadowlands. In fact, I guess it was the world record at the time. But yeah, world record, 151 and 4 in 1982. And for anybody else saw this horse, powerful brush horse, Genghis Khan. So now let's go down. Let's see what else I have here. We have so many of these horses to talk about. All right, now here's another one. Won the West. And some of you may remember this horse. Bred in New Jersey, purchased for $35,000. In 2009, as a 5-year-old, he was trained by Romberg. He went 147 in 2009, and this is another horse that was a late bloomer. If they had retired him early, we don't want to be talking about him. He wouldn't have much of a history at all. How about Rambling Willie? Horse, a legendary horse. Wasn't much of a horse early in his career. He retired with as a 13-year-old with 128 wins and 305 career starts. And there's another horse that if they had retired Rambling Willie after his 3-year-old season, then he wouldn't be Rambling Willie. We wouldn't even know about him at all. How about Cardigan Bay? Now, Cardigan Bay started his career as a 4-year-old. He beat Brett Hanover. Brett Hanover, by the way, did beat him several times. This horse, Cardigan Bay, was the first horse to win $1 million. It's pretty amazing. And he came over here and he was racing here, as a 7-year-old and 8-year-old horse, racing in the free-for-all ranks. Cardigan Bay, a legendary horse, best horse, that we are aware of here from Down Under. There were a few other horses though from Down Under. I'm not, well versed in the history of the horses from Down Under, but obviously Cardigan Bay, a legendary horse from down under who came over here and raced for Stanley Dancer and had a lot of exciting races. It's before my time, but I do know about it. Some of you may remember a horse named Golden Receiver. Now here's another horse. His best year was 2012, and guess what? He was 7 years old. So when he was a 3-year-old, early in his career, he was let's see now. This was a 7, 6, 5, 4. Yeah, he started his career as a 3-year-old, and he only won $19,500. Imagine if they retired him. But he just kept getting better and better. And then in 2012, Golden Receiver was, a monster free-for-all horse. 13 wins, went 148 at the Meadowlands. Very exciting horse to watch. And then we're going to go next to a horse. That's Golden Receiver also. Okay, so I got a little notes on him. Some of you may remember Western Ideal, who became, I believe, memory serves me correct, also that's right. He's also an outstanding stallion. Western Ideal. He set a world record for 5-year-olds and older on a half-mile track. As a 5-year-old, he went 148 on a half-mile track. This is another horse that came into his own as an older horse. One of the best examples is Always Be Mickey. I mean, this horse, as you know, he went 146 as a 5-year-old. This is a horse who he was a pretty nice colt, but he was racing in Indiana. He has his shows here as a 2-year-old, and then and as a 3-year-old, he had a pretty good year, 12 wins in 19 starts. But then he got injured, and he came back later in his career. He just kept, he was trained by Jimmy Takter at that point, and he just kept getting better and better. And as a let's see, how old was he again? Always Beautiful, 5-year-old. After a 5-year-old, went 146. And of course, that record was eventually broken by Bulldog Hanover that we mentioned. But this horse, Jimmy Takter knew it too. After he had his injury, Takter says, if I can keep this horse together, he's going to do great things. He said, there are some remarks here, and he did. Powerful horse, Always Be Mickey, probably one of the fastest horses I've ever seen. Some of you may remember a horse named Fool's Gold. This horse actually won the Breeders' Crown Trot 2 years. And he's another horse. Look at his early career. 0 for 4. Then he had a pretty good 3-year-old season, and then, he kind of floundered, but he just kept, all of a sudden he started putting it together. And then as a 7-year-old, here he is as a 7-year-old, over $1 million in earnings, went 151-3 at the Meadowlands. Some of you may remember when he beat Victory Tilly, the great French, was it French? I believe it was French, yeah. Victory Tilly came over from Europe for Stig Johansson, and he finished third in that race. Fool's Gold beat him in the Breeders' Crown. The week after, Victory Tilly did beat Fool's Gold, but Fool's Gold came into his own as a 7-year-old. Now, actually, as a 6-year-old, he won 434. But his 6 and 7-year-old seasons and his 8-year-old season, I mean, he was just a killer. Same thing when he was a 9-year-old. Top, very fast trotter. He could go right out to the lead. Some of you remember, I think it was Jim Doherty that trained him and drove him. Really terrific horse. Let's see who else we have here. Oh, Forest Skipper. I mean, Forest Skipper. This is another horse. Here you can see his first year he won 5 races and 8 starts for only $25,000. But then, as a 3-year-old, he started to put it together. It's a very good crop too, as he was racing against that Annihilator, type of all those good horses like Annihilator. But then, as a 5-year-old, let's see, was it a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old? Forest Skipper, 4-year-old. This is right up there with Art's Place that we were talking about, and these great 4-year-old seasons. 15 races, 15 wins, and just put it all together. Outstanding horse. Again, good thing they didn't retire him, because even though he had a good 3-year-old season, it was the 4-year-old season that made him, his legacy. And that's why, you retire these horses, you're not going to get that. All right, we did Fool's Gold. Okay, let's see. Forest Skipper. Brett Hanover was a great horse, so that's not really one I wanted to include. I think he was a great 2-year-old and a great 3-year-old. Sumac Lad. Here's another horse, a legendary horse. He won the international trot as an 8-year-old. This was a horse that was a late starter. He didn't even race as a young horse. He lived to 28 years old, but I mean, he was racing as an older horse and was one of the sport's legendary trotters. He was horse of the year in reached his career in 1962. Sumac Lad, and he was an 8-year-old, and he won the international trot. Pretty amazing. Now here's Sharton N, a great pacing mare, and she's another one that she was horse of the year as a 6-year-old. Now I forget what happened to her. She had some problems when she was young. She didn't race until she was I believe 4 or 5 years old. So, and then she put it together. You could see her first year. She only won 76,000, but then 19 wins. I guess that was down under, I believe. And then she put 19 wins in 24 starts, 15 wins in 19 starts, 146-4 for a pacing mare. I believe that was a record, right? And she was the first. She was a horse of the year as a pacing mare. So I mean, pretty amazing. And there's a lot of horses too that weren't necessarily great horses, but they were really had great careers. As free-for-all horses, and they also were late bloomers. Some of you may remember a horse named Sea Train, who raced at the Meadowlands. He won a ton of races. Very game horse. Maltecase Jr. actually had the horse later in his career and found the home for him and he retired. Casey loves that horse, Sea Train. Some of you may remember a horse named Fight the Foe, who was one of the greatest claims of all time. I can't remember the gentleman who claimed him for $10,000, but Fight the Foe went from $10,000 claimer to one of the top free-for-allers in the country again, as an age pacer. And then, of course, there were horses. I couldn't get a lot of information on some of these older horses, but there were from years ago, before my time, but horses like Overcall, Adios Vic. Adios Vic, I believe, beat Brett Hanover twice. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. But, again, Adios Vic, Overcall, late bloomers. Sir Dowray was another one. Sir Dowray, I mean, I kind of remember, so I guess, I am pretty old. But we mentioned Rambling Willie, won the rest. Foiled Again is another one. Foiled Again, retired as the richest horse with $7 million in earnings. Foiled Again, wasn't a great horse until he was an older horse. So, it's really interesting because you look at all these horses now. This year you have a top 3-year-old named Confederate. Some of you remember I posted a video a few months back after the North American Cup, where Confederate finished second. I said, I had a video saying he was going to win the Meadowlands Pace. I mean, he came his last half in 52-1 in the North American Cup. He also finished second in the Breeders' Crown for 2-year-olds last year, and then he came back with second in the North American Cup. But he was just too far off the pace in those races. Then he won the Meadowlands Pace. He just went first over and just jogged. And he's having a really good year. He's probably going to be the 3-year-old of the year, maybe horse of the year. He has a few more races left. I believe he's racing in the Breeders' Crown. Hopefully, I would imagine. He did skip the Little Brown Jug, but I don't know if that race was really ideal for him because he's kind of a grinder. But Confederate, he's not going to retire, in my opinion, as a great horse. He'll retire as a horse. They'll remember him as a top 3-year-old. I mean, people will remember him, and of course he has a chance to be a good sire. But they want to go for the money. I mean, look, I get it. They're in the breeding business. But the thing is that I thought that Confederate would have a chance, as an older horse to maybe set, a world record, maybe go under, a mile in under 146, maybe even go after Bulldog Hanover's record. Who knows what he could do as, as a 4-year-old. And part of the problem when you retire these horses after their 3-year-old season, there's a lot of problems, because not only are you hurting the horse's legacy, and you're stopping the horse from really his best years, because a lot of horses are going to do their best racing as 4 or 5-year-olds. And 4-year-old is really a peak year for racehorses. In my opinion, most horses will be better and will do their absolute best when they're a 4-year-old. Some will even do their best at 5 and 6. It depends on how they what their physical conditioning was as they were developing. Some horses have some little problems that when they're 2 or 3 year old, and then if you keep racing them, they get sound, and they put it all together. But when you retire a horse after his 3-year-old season, another problem is you're not racing against older horses. Now Confederate probably will race against older horses in the Breeders' Crown, in November. But you may sometimes you may have a horse he starts against older horses once. Whereas these great horses, from years ago, like some of these horses I mentioned, they raced against older horses many times. And it's a lot harder to beat older horses. Like when you start your 4-year-old season, like say you had a good 3-year-old season, you're racing against 3-year-olds. Then you go into the free-for-all ranks and you're racing against 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. And so you could be racing against 2 or 3 horses of the year. You're racing against a bunch of killers sometimes. And some of these crops, like some of these horses I mentioned, they raced against, really good horses. I mean, Genghis Khan wasn't facing a bunch of slow horses, I can tell you that. Anybody who watched those races, will tell you that. Remember there were horses like Matt Scooter. There's a lot of horses that we didn't even list that were, phenomenal 4 and 5-year-olds. But that's the thing, thoroughbred fans, I think, seem to understand this better. Because like in thoroughbred racing, they're doing the same thing. They're retiring these horses at 3, and everybody who follows the sport knows that you're not going to be named one of the all-time greats when if you retire after 3-year-old, like you take a horse like American Pharaoh. Well, I think he raced a few times as a 4-year-old, but he raced only 11 times. Justify raced 6 times, so. They won the Triple Crown, but you can't compare them to horses like, Dr. Fager or Forgo. These great, Kelso. Kelso won Horse of the Year 4 times, and thoroughbred fans realize that if you're not beating these older horses, how good were you? Could you have beaten the older horses? Maybe you wouldn't have beaten them, and some horses don't. There have been plenty of horses that, especially in thoroughbred racing, where, they were really good 3-year-olds. They got into the 4-year-old season, and all of a sudden, they were getting beaten because they were facing better horses. And then you were kind of like, guess he wasn't as good as I thought he was. And it's the same thing in harness racing. If you don't beat older horses, that hurts your legacy. Confederate, in my opinion, will go down as a top 3-year-old. I don't think you could put him in the class of, the greats. Cam Fella, in horses like that, these horses raced a ton of races, and they faced all these tough horses. And I have a lot of respect for Confederate for his ability. I said in my video, this is a powerful horse. But they are going to retire him after his 3-year-old season. They're going for, the breeding money. It is what it is, but, he's not going to be a legend. And a lot of these horses I mentioned, in fact, all these horses I mentioned, it's funny too. Even if you look at a horse like Arts Place, now somebody put Arts Place on this list, and he really didn't fit in the sense that he was an outstanding 2-year-old. Arts Place, he was actually a great 2-year-old. As a 3-year-old, he got hurt, and I think he finished second in the Meadowlands pace to Precious Bunny, and I covered that race as a reporter. I was there for the Racing Times. I was at the Meadowlands covering that race, and that was a really tough field, a really good crop. But unfortunately, for Arts Place, he did have some physical problems that year. But fortunately, he came back as a 4-year-old, and he had one of the greatest 4-year-old seasons in the history of sport. So even though he was a great 2-year-old, Arts Place wouldn't be Arts Place if he didn't race as a 4-year-old. I mean, the reason why we still talk about Arts Place is because that's where he set his legend. That's where he set his legacy, And, and like a lot of these horses, all these horses we mentioned, I mean, if they retired at 3, we wouldn't even, some of them would be complete footnotes. Some of them you would never even heard of. I mean, you literally would have never heard of them, because they were, some of them weren't even racing at 3, but some of them just weren't that good, or they were pretty good, but not legends. Instead, these are the horses that we mentioned here, World Again, Always Be, Mickey, Rambling Willie, Cardigan Bay, Sumac Lad, Forrest Skipper, and like I said, there were many that weren't great horses like that, but were still top free-for-all horses who all came into their own later. And there's many more, by the way. This is just some of them. So that's the thing. If you retire a horse after his 3-year-old season and you go for the money, in the breeding, they are athletes. They are part of the sport. That is the sport. That's what people go to see, all right? They want 2 things when you go to the track. You want to see the good horses, you want to see good racing, and you want to, have some fun with the betting. But when you retire the horses, can you imagine if Babe Ruth retired the year before he hit 16 home runs? He wouldn't be Babe Ruth, right? He would be like some guy that, it was this guy years ago, boy, he had a lot of power, but you know what I mean? Like when you retire these athletes and they don't become stars, that's a killer for the sport. These horses that I mentioned, if they had retired as a 3-year-old, they wouldn't exist basically in history. We wouldn't be talking about them. And could you imagine where the sport would be if they didn't have these horses? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And if anybody has any other horses, email me or put them on that Facebook page. Any horses that we missed. There's so many of them. It doesn't have to be a great horse. It could be a horse that was just a really good horse, like a Golden Receiver, who was really top quality free-for-aller. But anyway, this is Pandy with Power Pace. And remember to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to make more videos like this, and for thoroughbred racing and harness racing, and the NFL picks, which I'm doing now too. So thanks for listening.